In this second presentation for Chapter 8, we're going to be looking at body language. And so we're going to be looking specifically at how we use what are called emblems, gestures that have a direct meaning, illustrators that hand gestures or arm gestures that we use to complement what's being said. This is sometimes considered to be meta-communicative in the sense that it gives information, provides information about the communication that's being made verbally. Facial expressions are called effect displays, in contrast to emblems or illustrators, which are culturally bound. Most experts consider facial expressions to be fairly universal. We'll be looking at regulators, which are ways to manage conversations, and adapters. These are often kind of involuntary actions that we make. So we'll start by talking about emblems and illustrators. So emblems are hand gestures, and they have a direct meaning. So when Spock does that, we know that that means live long and prosper. Illustrators, on the other hand, are not typically used by themselves, but are used in conjunction with saying something. And so when Nikita Khrushchev in 1960 at his famous speech in the UN, where he said, "We will bury you," to capitalist United States, he pounded on the podium with his fist and indicating that he had very strong opinions, very strong emotions, and that he was sure of what he was saying. Unfortunately, he was wrong. Okay, well, let's look at some concrete examples of gestures. And one of the things we'll be looking at is the use of gestures across cultures. So this is a woman from Iran. What does this gesture mean? Here's the multiple choice test. Does it mean good luck to you? You'll always be number one for me, or up yours? Well, you might be surprised to learn it's up yours. But the same gesture in different cultures has a significantly different meaning. So in the United States, this is something good, number one, or things are looking up, particularly with two hands with a thumbs up. What does this mean in Germany? For example, if you signal this to a waiter or waitress in a restaurant or a bar, it means I'll have one drink. That's the way you start counting in Germany. If you've seen the movie Inglourious Bastards, there's a crucial difference there in that movie between how Germans count and how Americans count. It's a woman from France using this gesture. Here are your options. I wish I hadn't seen that. I don't believe you. I'm looking at a very handsome man. Well, this is called mon oeil. Literally, that means my eye in French. And what it means is, I don't believe you. Here's another gesture. Japan. What's the significance of this one? Scared like a bunny. I've been hearing things about you. I'm angry. And the answer is C. But this gesture with the fingers constructing kind of a horn has a different meaning in Europe, and we'll see what that means in a video clip later on. Well, how are these used, these emblems and illustrators? Well, there are four principal uses. The first is in greetings and departure, so we wave to somebody who's leaving, for example, or we shake hands to somebody that we're meeting. Those are examples of greetings and departures. This is, of course, something that's a lot of fun, but it's also very dangerous to use. Insult gestures, fight or flight, that's something that probably we don't use as much in the United States. The textbook talks about some examples of that in other cultures. The same is true of gestures to indicate friendly romantic relationships, as well as hand signals to indicate that, that we think somebody is gay or lesbian. Those are things that are talked about in the text, examples given in the text as well. The gestures that are used as emblems and illustrators typically are culturally bound. That is to say, they're linked to particular cultures. Now, they can be spread from one culture to another. We'll see examples of that. But also, gestures can be more regional in nature. And we're going to watch a video clip that illustrates that. And these are different ways to indicate yes and no.
Most regional body language has a long and complicated history, with the origins often forgotten.
One of the special qualities of regional gestures is that they're amazingly conservative. They remain confined to their own particular area, regardless of the fact that all around them national boundaries keep changing. As a result of this, within a particular country today, you can find what we could call a gesture frontier, a place where one gesture stops and another one begins. This is a gesture frontier behind me. It's the Massico Range in central Italy. And south of here in Naples, people use, for example, the head toss when they're saying no. Up in the north in Rome, they shake their heads from side to side when they're saying no. And we were amazed to find that here at the Massico Range is a very narrow area, just a few miles, where you get the switch from head tossing to head shaking.
The explanation of this switch is astonishing. In origin, the head toss is a Greek gesture, and many centuries ago, the ancient Greeks colonized southern Italy and started to move north. And it was here at the Massico Range that they stopped their advance 2,500 years ago. And to this day, in the north, people still give the typical European head shake when saying no. While in the south, they still give the ancient Greek head toss, and this difference has survived despite all the mobility of modern life and the spread of films and television programs. The old gesture frontier remains. Yes signals made with the head are just as complicated as no signals. In most parts of the world, people nod the head up and down when saying yes. Many people mistakenly assume that this action is completely global, but this isn't the case. There are two areas where something else happens. One of them is India, where instead of being nodded, the head is wobbled from side to side when saying yes. To visitors, this looks like a maybe, but it's not. It's a sign of definite agreement. When your taxi driver agrees with you, you can see his head rolling from side to side, and you get the impression that he's undecided. But every wobble he makes means yes.
Do you find people excited by these, or is it just really...
In another region altogether, it's not just the visitors who are confused. Even the inhabitants are not always sure what's going on. Here in Bulgaria, they use both the head nod and the head wobble when saying yes, which creates total confusion. Why on earth they should do this remains a mystery, even to them.
So it's interesting, this idea of gesture frontiers. It's not the same as national or political frontiers. And the other thing that's interesting about this, that not just that it's not national, but that it goes back so far, and the historical origins of how these gestures are used in this case. And so in this particular clip, going back to Roman times, we're going to look at, next we're going to look at illustrators. And you recall that illustrators, as opposed to emblems, go together with speech. And so we'll look at this clip and then talk about it.
Even the simplest human action, such as the handshake, has countless variations. Sometimes it's reduced to a mere palm touch, as with these Maasai elders in East Africa. But in other countries it becomes more elaborate. In Mali, in West Africa, the handshaker briefly touches his own forearm as the palms clasp. In Morocco, the handshakers kiss one another's hands at the same time as clasping them. And in Turkey, these Kurdish farmers have taken this simple action and converted it into what amounts to a minor ritual. It's the local rule that they can't start bargaining until they're shaking hands. They have to keep on doing so until the deal is struck. The essential feature of handshaking is that it's an egalitarian act. Regardless of their social standing, the two people involved are momentarily performing identical actions.
I think a lot of times we think the handshake is universal. It's an illustrator because typically when we shake somebody's hand, we also say something, oh, glad to see you, or how have you been doing, things like that. But it's interesting, I think in the United States very often we think that handshakes and how we shake hands, that's something universal, and that it's really important to have for a man to have a firm handshake. But that's not that's not universal across cultures, and we saw in that clip some examples from Mali and Morocco where the way to shake hands is quite different. Very interesting in Turkey in terms of how that enters, shaking hands, how that enters into buy and sell negotiations. I would disagree with the clip in this respect that handshakes not always an egalitarian act. There's this expression, who has the upper hand? Well, sometimes in shaking hands, people will want to be on top because that has some kind of symbolic value. That's not the case universally. It's not the case in all cultures. It's not the case in all contexts, but sometimes it is important. Greeting rituals are important in a lot of cultures, and in some cultures they're very ritualized. That's the case in Japan, for example, with bowing or with exchanging business cards. Different cultures have obviously different ways to express greetings. This is an important concept to learn in traveling. Obviously, greetings are important. We have the modern DAP greeting and pound hug, the fist pump and the one-arm hug that is used often in the United States to indicate who's in and who's out in a particular group, something that can be misunderstood, and that was illustrated in 2008 by Michelle and Barack Obama doing a fist bump before a speech that he was giving, and that was described by a Fox network commentator as a terrorist fist jab. Well, let's look at what everybody has fun with, namely insult gestures, and we'll look at some cross-cultural insult gestures and then talk about those.
One of the most obvious examples of this, and one of the most dangerous, is the insult gesture. This Turkish pedestrian displays his anger with the thrust of a stiff forearm, using his arm symbolically as an aggressively erect penis. A slightly more obscure insult is the cornuta, or horn sign, frequently seen in Italy. It implies that the victim of the insult is a cuckold, that his wife is unfaithful to him. In North America, the most common insult is the middle finger jerk, employing the index finger as a symbolic penis. This is an ancient Roman gesture and is well known in many countries. Much more localized is the Greek moutsa. This dates back to Byzantine times and symbolizes excrement being pushed into the victim's face. In Britain, the main insult is a two-fingered gesture, which dates back to the Battle of Agincourt. It's a gesture that foreigners sometimes confuse with the V for victory sign, but that's performed with the hand the other way around.
So here we have a variety of ways, and I think that this is just a small selection, what you saw in that clip, a small selection of what's out there in terms of insults, and here there's a great deal of variation culturally. It's obviously something that you have to be very careful with. I think one of the surprising things for a lot of Americans is this V for victory. I think we think that really doesn't matter how you hold your two fingers, but as you saw from this clip, it does make a significant difference. Finally, we're going to talk about nonverbal accents. And just as with verbal accents with language, you have individual variations in body language as well. So people might use their kind of a different way to greet or salute. Laughing, I recall that in the very popular Seinfeld series, there is a character named Elaine, and Elaine had a kind of unique laugh. But the other thing that she did was she bent over her body, almost bowing when she was laughing. Body movements, so the people might have, individuals might have a certain way to shrug their shoulders, for example. Sitting is something that's interesting as well. That's something we're not really discussed in this chapter to any extent, but one of the things that Americans need to be aware of is when you sit in particular cultures, there's a certain way that is appropriate and other ways that are inappropriate. And I think Americans don't think about that very much. And one of the things, for example, in Middle Eastern countries you need to be careful about is sitting so that your soles of your shoes are showing. But even in countries, in European countries, I know that when I've taken groups of American students abroad, that sometimes American students, when they get into a train or bus, and there are not many people around, they put their feet up on another seat. And I think Americans think there's nothing wrong with that. And I remember one occasion when some of the students were doing that in Germany, and the conductor came by and gave them a very severe lecture on how you sit. We're going to look at an example of nonverbal accent with walking and with politicians. And so let's take a look at this clip, and then we'll talk about it.
For those who study nonverbal communication, one of the first indicators they look out for is the way someone's body moves. At this Camp David summit, President Bush is the host to visiting Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin knows the world is watching him on American soil, and he also knows that his people are watching, so he must show strength.
Here, though, both leaders are making a strong body language statement.
Now here we are, two powerful world leaders in a sort of striding contest. Because of course, the faster you stride, the more strong, powerful and fit you are.
But it's not just the speed of walking that sends out messages.
Vladimir Putin and George Bush, both of whom are fantastically powerful men, have two completely different kinds of power, and it evidences itself through body language.
Thank you all for coming.
Vladimir Putin has what I would call a very animal power, a strongman power, and he walks by having his shoulders, they're actually bouncing back and forth, and he walks, he also makes gestures, he's very active. I would almost call it a kind of sexy power. George Bush, on the other hand, has a more traditional and I would say American power. There's very little movement above the shoulders. He's trying to look like he's controlled. There's no extra wasted energy.
Thank you all for coming.
Perceiving the body language message of these two powerful presidents is straightforward, but body language is often complex and easily misunderstood. Here, President Clinton leads Israeli and Palestinian leaders Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat out before the press during peace negotiations. It's all smiles for the cameras, but behind a facade of bonhomie, there's a power struggle going on. Clinton jokingly explains that none of them will take any questions.
We pledged to each other we would answer no questions and offer no comments. So I have to set a good example.
The body language then revealed just why that was.
Oh my.
Wow.
Wow. Almost a physical fight.
Many viewed this apparently lighthearted tussle as a sign that Arafat and Barak were getting on well. Think again.
There is a great meaning behind who goes through the door first. Now, of course, you know, here in the West, letting someone through the door first doesn't really matter. It's polite, maybe. But in the Middle East, it has significant cultural impact.
The host, the power person, says, I'm in control. I'll help you through the door. I'll show you the way.
Thank you. Please, thank you.
Throw in the fear and tension present in most Middle East negotiations, and suddenly the desire of both Arafat and Barak not to go through that door before the other starts to make sense.
This is a classic example, in an extreme way, of how the last man through the door is the winner. So Barak reaches for Yasser Arafat. Arafat literally grabs his arm, moves around, and starts waggling his finger at Barak, Barak then uses it as an opportunity, like a wrestling match, to move around to actually be behind Arafat, and then literally grabs Arafat, who holds him by the arm, and shoves him through the door bodily.
So you've got fear and power struggle showing in big, bold body language movements.
So body language can be important in a lot of different contexts, including in power situations and with politicians, and we saw some examples of that. Okay, well, I think we'll end the presentation at this point, and we're going to move on in the next presentation to talk about facial expressions.